All right, so I found a letter to the editor from the Eagle Tribune today. And this letter highlights many of the problems that good, upstanding supporters of the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms have with gun control advocates. All right, so here's a picture of it in full. Okay, so don't worry if you couldn't read all of that. I will be posting a link to the article in the video, and I will be posting the words as I respond to them. So let's get started. Yes, it is an impassioned debate. And yes, there is a lot of statements made out of ignorance, but they're coming from your side. In fact, you yourself are a textbook case, which you will show us in your very own letter to the editor. You start this article off by mentioning our founders won the war for independence with muskets. That's true. Guess what? That was the military weapon of the day. That was one of the military weapons of the day. They had cannons too, and stuff like that. So they were talking about military weapons when they wrote the Second Amendment. Their equivalent today would be something like an M4 or an M16 or an AK-47 or a G36, the standard infantry weapons of the day. This is what the Second Amendment was primarily put in place to protect, is people being able to own these. Next paragraph. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say this author doesn't know the difference between tyranny and oppression. You see, just because the government isn't rounding people up and executing them doesn't mean that the government hasn't overstepped its boundaries to what a government should be in a free and just society. Now, to people like this author who think the government should come in and act as our mommy and daddy, she sees no problem with the government coming in and saying, well, that's too dangerous. Let me take that from you. And actually, they don't go it like that. It's normally, they come in with police officers and stuff like that. They come in with federal agents and say, oh, shoot, you broke the law. That's too dangerous for you. We're giving you a no-knock warrant. This author projects hardcore. You see, she uses the term propagandists. Well, I hate to break it to you, but the gun control side uses all sorts of propaganda. Assault weapons, even though they can't define what an assault weapon is, and all the different laws governing what assault weapons are, and the states that have the bans, and including the expired federal ban and the proposed one in 2013, there's not a single definition. And in fact, if you look at what it says, it looks like the person of this ban was going after weapons that look scary as opposed to what their actual capabilities were. But then again, don't expect the author to do this. And by the way, if I sound hostile to the author in any way, I'm intending to be, because this stuff is getting real old. They make statements like the United States government is trying to take away your right to protect yourself. Well, the argument is that no, that these proposed restrictions are a violation of our right to keep and own firearms, our right to choose how we protect ourselves. This author likes to pretend like, I guess, that there are no gun-free zones in existence. There are no government-mandated gun-free zones in existence. Well, when you say to people, you can't carry your gun in here. We're doing this by government mandate. Well, that's a violation of your right to carry a tool to protect yourself. When you sit there and say, well, you know what, you shouldn't have more than X amount of rounds in the magazine to protect yourself, you know what, you're infringing on that right too. I'll go as far as to say, well, hey, you know what? You know, if you're going to sit there and tell us we can't have a machine gun to protect ourselves, you know, you are infringing on that right. Regardless on how ridiculous you think it sounds to have a machine gun to protect yourself. Or, you know, how ridiculous you think it is. And she goes on to say, well, the U.S. government is, no one in the U.S. government is trying to take away citizens' right to own a gun. No, there are people that are trying to violate that right, though, and ignore it. Hillary Clinton's a big example. Sugar tits. Hillary Clinton's a big example. She proposed that Australia was the gold standard to gun control. Guess what happened there? Mass confiscations. You have to get, even to own a bolt-action rifle, you have to get a, hell, not even a bolt-action rifle, an air gun. You have to get a license and prove a demonstrable need to own that. At that point, that's not a right. That the government's treating it as a privilege when the laws are like that. Now, I know you don't understand the difference between a right or a privilege. Your commie high school teacher or your commie university professor probably fried your brain on that one. You know, and if it sounds like I'm being hostile to you, the author of this article, I am. Because you're sitting there spouting out nonsense that's been debunked and debunked and debunked over and over again, and you're telling anybody who disagrees with you or opposes you, you're accusing them of being a bully. So guess what? You're going to get a little bit of harsh language. You're going to get a harsh tone. You're going to get people being mean to you back because, quite frankly, we're tired of it. You know, and if you think we're being mean, well, the consequences of what you're proposing are a hell of a lot worse than just being mean. Try doing 5 years in prison for either intentionally or unintentionally violating one of those laws that you're proposing. These statements are silly and only designed to inflame and obfuscate the debate. Again, projection. You know, because when people sit there and impose a law that says, well, hey, now, before you can let your friend borrow a gun, or before you can give a relative a gun, now you have to get them through a background check. You know, and when they argue against that, you sit there and accuse them of wanting to give domestic abusers guns or give murderers guns. To hell with you. You're the ones obfuscating. You're the ones that are sitting there trying to blur the lines of reality there on that. You're the ones that are trying to confuse people. You know, just like the term assault weapons. Sugarman came out and said back in the, was it the 80s, that confusion between the difference between an assault weapon and a machine gun can only lead to further support for its ban. Therefore, we should take that course of action. Yeah, this is simple projection on your part. Reasonable people get shouted at by bullies. You're not the reasonable person here. Your side is by no means the reasonable person. And anytime a gun rights advocate goes to try to have a dialogue with you, be it on the streets, it usually is a gun control advocate shouting them down, getting in their space. You know, get on social media, you know, such as Twitter. It's usually the gun control advocates blocking gun rights advocates marking their comments as spam and trying to get them kicked off Twitter, trying to get their accounts suspended. So, hate to break this to you, you are projecting on this. But you're going to further destroy your case with a third paragraph. And the first term in the paragraph, assault weapon. A term like Saturday Night Special has no real meaning to it. That's evident by, the different assault weapons bans they have in 7 different states now, and the now sunset 94 assault weapons ban and the proposed 2013 assault weapons ban. None of them are alike. They all have different definitions, and if you read them, you sure get the feeling that the people who wrote them were writing this ban based on how the weapon looked as opposed to how it functioned. But this whole sentence here shows that the author has no clue what she's talking about. Assault weapons and semi-automatic weapons are not necessary for hunting or home protection. Yeah. Well, the author doesn't obviously know what semi-automatic is. Pretty much all handguns nowadays, with the exception of revolvers, are semi-automatic. Again, you have a few muzzle-loading handguns, and you have a few break-open handguns, But most handguns are semi-automatic, or revolvers, and most of them now are semi-automatic. There's a reason why they've gone to semi-automatic. Semi-automatic is a better option, especially if you have to deal with multiple assailants. Of course, the author wouldn't know anything about this. The author probably hadn't, the author definitely haven't looked into self-defense or using a firearm for personal protection. She just spouted off this nonsense. Not suitable hunting guns? Well, maybe you ought to tell my late grandpappy that. This was his shotgun. It's semi-automatic. This is his duck gun. Perhaps you should tell Remington that, because this is what this was designed for, was a trap and duck gun. But even at the beginning of the article, you go on to say that the reason why the Second Amendment was put in place was the founders had just fought a war for independence. So the Second Amendment is primarily there to protect military weapons, to protect civilian ownership of military weapons, first and foremost. A person diagnosed with schizophrenia should not be allowed to buy a gun. Well, we already have a law in place prohibiting those who have been adjudicated mentally defective from not being allowed to purchase a firearm. The standard is that if they've been committed for 72 hours or more involuntarily, that makes them a prohibited person for life. And hate to break it to you, but you can't just go around saying, well, you're schizophrenic, you shouldn't have a gun or stuff like that. That's actually a violation of a tenet that of a free and just society, is you don't deprive somebody involuntarily of their life, liberty, or property without due process. There has to be due process before you can deprive somebody of that right. Of course, I don't think you understand that concept either. I'm going to go out on a limb and say you don't understand that concept either. Person with suicidal thoughts or depression should not be allowed. Well, okay, are you a mind reader? Can you tell they have suicidal thoughts? And on depression, a lot of people suffer depression temporarily. It doesn't make you a dangerous or suicidal person. But again, you're fear-mongering. You projected it onto the NRA. You're doing the very same things you accuse the NRA of doing. without any shame, it looks like. You know? And if it seems like I'm being rude or disrespectful to you, well, I am. It's intended to be that way. You see, because you're so inconsiderate, rude, and disrespectful enough to go out and write something like that without even doing the most rudimentary of research yourself on the issue. Next line is a perfect example. Felons should not be allowed to walk into gun stores and purchase a gun. Guess what? They're not. You get a background check every time you walk into an FFL and purchase a firearm, unless you fall into a certain exemption. I know Texas, a CHL holder can do that. But guess what? It's you have to go through a lot more qualification to be a CHL holder than you do to have to actually buy a gun. You can't have any Class A or Class B misdemeanors on your record in the last 10 years to be a CHL holder. You can't owe any money in child support. You can't be overdue on any of your money that you owe the state, such as a vehicle registration, such as speeding tickets and stuff like that. So, yeah, there are a lot of ways you can't legally be a CHL holder in Texas. Let's see. But then again, if you just walked into a gun store and actually not even have to buy a gun yourself, but just ask the dealer if he'd walk you through the process, you'd find that out. But you didn't even do that, did you, moron? And then you go and expose your own ass. Parents must lock their guns up in cabinets or be held liable if their child uses a gun and commits a crime. Well, guess what, dumbass? That's also law in many states. I know in Texas, if the child even gets access to your gun without supervision, it's a Class B misdemeanor. And if they actually discharge the gun, it's felony, or a Class A misdemeanor. Yeah. But of course, you didn't do your research before you wrote this letter. That's apparent. And now you look like an ass. And again, the fourth paragraph just goes on, to show how stupid this author is. She didn't do her research, obviously, before she wrote this article. I guess she thinks that what's written in federal code is just NRA propaganda. But we're going to go on and read it for you. We make laws about who can vote and at what age. Same's true for firearm purchases and possession. So what's your fucking point, moron? We make laws about how old somebody has to be for entering military service. Again, we make laws about how old somebody has to be before they can go into a gun store and purchase a firearm. 18 for shotguns and rifles, 21 for NFA Title II items and handguns. But of course, the author wouldn't know what an NFA Title II item is either. She didn't do her research there. You could have fucking walked into a gun store and had an FFL explain this to you. But I'm sure, Joyce, that whatever that FFL tells you in your mind is just NRA propaganda. Hell, I'm sure the whole Federal Code of Regulations is NRA propaganda, right, Joyce? Fucking idiot. Yes, and I'm going to insult you and be mean to you because you've earned it. To go that far to make all the statements you have made in this letter to the editor, you need it. We can agree on some common sense gun laws regarding gun control without allowing the propagandists to cloud the debate. Your side's propagandists. We already have common sense gun laws. In fact, I think we've gone overboard on that to the point where it's no longer common sense. You know? I mean, you're talking about having common sense. You didn't even have the common sense to do your research before writing this article, idiot. You know? But here you have it. This is the reason why people are upset with you gun control advocates. This is the reason why you get so much condemnation. This is why you gun control advocates get so many nasty statements from NRA members. It's because you're fucking stupid. You make these statements here, then you sit there and say, oh, common sense, and you don't even have the common sense to go out and research the topic before you write this stuff down. Either that, or you know it, and you're just so dishonest that you're going to make up lies about this anyway. That would be the Shannon Watts types, the Michael Bloomberg types, who know actually what the law is. They're smart enough to be able to understand it, but they still want to be dishonest. They still want to go out and mislead people. You want to know why there's no civil and rational debate on this issue in this country? It's because of people like you. I'm done with this fucking idiot.